Alisée, for joining in. Very happy to have you here with us. And Vibe is our series to address the unconscious gender gap that still exists, and also talk about why women sometimes face the issue of imposter syndrome in a way that they self-doubt their own achievements, don't like to speak about it as much. And is that one of the reasons why we see lesser women representation, especially in aggressive industries like investing? So that's the premise of the interview. And I've read about your journey. It's very interesting. You started a company by yourself at a very young age of 24. So why don't you start by telling us a little about that, as to how did your initial years of career start?
Yes. So I had I initially started in a corporate job. So I was working at L'Oréal and product manager for a luxury brand. And as much as I learned a lot, more importantly, I learned what I didn't want to do, and I also understood what became important or not important in self-worth and also self-growth. And initially, I had worked very hard in getting kind of, that perfect CV. I was working very hard to get the best grades, to be in every extracurricular activity. I thought that a big corporate with a big brand name, with a big title and a career path was kind of this succession of achievements that were needed for personal fulfillment and really to kind of please within society. Getting into that, I realized I wasn't happier. I was quite complacent. I felt like a number. I didn't see my impact. And I was terrorized at the idea that everything was planned out. And many steps made me leave the job. But one that I always mention is I came across Eleanor Roosevelt, which is an unbelievable woman. And she wrote a lot. And she mentions that you should do one thing that scares you every day, because it is in those little things that keep you uncomfortable that you maintain the courage to do the things that you do. And I thought it was so brilliant and so obvious that I wasn't scaring myself, that I wasn't comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And I was very fortunate because I met my co-founders quite immediately. And it was the right match. So 10 years later, we're still the same with Seedstars. And yeah, so that's how kind of the switch happened. And it didn't seem like I was building a company. It felt like I was joining a team, and we're going to try and do cool stuff together. And this cool stuff, we hoped that it would have an impact.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I imagine in my head as a series of events, how you started with L'Oreal and then how you went on to start your own company. But I have a few questions lined up for each of these parts. Firstly, how did you even get this thought that, okay, having a great CV with a big brand name will help you flourish in your career? Was it your family that influenced this thought, the society, your peers? What was it really that got this thought in your mind?
Yeah, I think I still kind of have to deal with it, where the the external judgment is still something I care a lot about, which shouldn't be the case. But that was even stronger when I was younger. And funnily enough, it didn't come from my parents, simply because I was putting so much pressure on myself. They didn't need to put pressure. Maybe if I had had a different personality, it would have been different. So it really came from me, and I was the first to be the critique and really be very harsh on myself. And so what seemed to be successful and appropriate and likable was a good student, someone that was able to lead in different activities, going to the right schools, being able to push forward the right brandings of universities and then corporates. To be confident as a woman, but also gentle and kind. And so I think I really fell into the trap. And I guess I was lucky. And then again, I wish I did this at 15 years old, but I was lucky to to wake up quite early and focus on what matters, which is working with people that you believe have substance, and having a certain integrity to the principles you set yourself, and trying to be a better person for the better of the community.
Yeah, but you mentioned a very important point here, that you wanted to be confident and yet remain gentle. Now, that is a very peculiar feminine trait, that women always want to be, at the center of something, create an impact, but also make sure that, oh, they don't hurt anyone. But is that why you felt so, or was it because you just were somebody like that, and you wanted to fit in a world where confidence was the only solution to be?
I think it's extremely important. Like, now I have children, and I do reflect a lot on how can I give them what are the tools I need to put in place so that they build self-confidence. So self-confidence is probably one of the more fundamental elements I hope they build as soon as possible, because then it's limitless, the opportunities, and you have an unbelievable resilience and capability to um, live a responsible and content life. um, I think I was faking a lot of that confidence, and at the same time trying to stay at my spot, because that's what seemed to get a positive reaction from society. I try really not to function like this, because you end up living kind of someone else's life. You end up being much more in the perception than what is really true to you. Um, but I thought that was kind of the nice packaging of what I should look like.
But this packaging mindset came from, what was it, the male dominated society, which got a thought in your mind that, okay, I should be aggressive, confident to make my position in the world?
So I shouldn't be too aggressive at that time, but I th- for a long time, so a lot of this I call it, like, I put it under the umbrella of this kind of imposter syndrome. And for a long time, I thought this was related to feminine traits. So in many ways, it was kind of related to my estrogen level. I really thought it was something feminine. And then I read a lot about it, and I remember Michelle Obama and other leaders around the world that were kind of explaining it under very different light, that actually the imposter syndrome was in many ways kind of a social construct of a society being heavily patriarchal, or built and maintained for a certain group of people, which ostracized most of the minorities. It wasn't just women, it was a lot of people that felt, as in general, an outcast in the day-to-day. And so you build up through very subtle biases and inequalities every day, a sense of not belonging or not having your place. And in the contrary, a lot also have, over time, an overconfident sense of belonging, when really it shouldn't be the case. So now I would like to think that indeed it is also a societal effect and consequence, versus something that is genetically bound to me, which actually doesn't hold true.
Yeah, that's a very important point you mentioned about the imposter syndrome that most of the women go through. And it doesn't come to them naturally, but the way the society thinks, they feel that, okay, that's the right way to go. And
Mm.
but I'm very glad that you overcame that syndrome, so to speak, at a very young age. People take 10 years in their career to understand that, okay, this is not how I would like to be. How did you
Yeah,
do it at that young age?
I don't know. I think it got much better the day that I kind of accepted I have it. Okay, there's so much you can kind of throw away from life baggages that you've built up. But So I think accepting it was for me a way to move forward, and also being very pragmatic. You have a tendency to over criticize, or tend to see the glass half full, or tend to consider yourself not up for the job, if I may say so. And so I was very pragmatic. I would have actually very important men in my life, my partner in life, my father, on kind of speed dial, and I would always call them before taking on or not an opportunity, which felt like an impossible challenge to resolve. So I figured out systems that allow me to really understand, okay, alert, you're going back to these habits. Don't let yourself spend too much time with yourself at this time, because you're not the best judge of yourself. And that allows you to step back and see it from a different perspective. And of course, nothing beats experience. So that's maybe the definition of a maturity. Over time, you do build a certain resilience to that. My issue is I tend to just then increase the bar and make it hard enough, with hard enough challenges, that it gets spooky again.
Yeah, but you mentioned about this fact that you would, call your father or your partner to make
Yeah.
certain decisions. A man wouldn't call his wife or maybe the parents to make a decision. Why is it really that women have to do all of this naturally? I mean, why?
Yeah, so actually, I think men do it a lot. The difference is the question of how do you cope with your imposter syndrome, or do you have imposter syndrome, is never asked to men. But I actually, and I see around me, the men in my life actually depend very much on this close knit community of their partners, of their family, of their children, whomever it is, that really support them in taking on these challenges to different degrees, and they have more or less self-confidence. But I think it's more that we don't ask them these questions.
Yeah, that's because they also don't do that in
They-
real life.
yeah, they probably don't have that level. Um but I mean, I a lot of men also, for issues of nationality, upbringing, and the differences they have that are more or less accepted, they do feel this also and understand it, absolutely.
Yeah, but apart from the gender bias or any of the confidence issues, keeping all of that apart, some people are very happy in their careers working for greater organizations, even at the fresher level. So, what
Yeah.
was there in your mind really that made you uncomfortable and made you feel like you were just a number there? What was it really
Yeah.
that you wanted to achieve in life?
um I think I had this sense that I was supposed to do something bigger than myself. This sense of community, this sense of loyalty to a bigger mission. I didn't get that out of selling expensive lipstick. So there was a disconnect between what I upheld as important principles of life and the majority of the hours I was spending every day. And I do believe it's also related to everyone's personality, temperament. But what is fulfilling for me was really the sense that the input of hours I would put into something, I would need to see quite an immediate consequence of the performance of that activity. And yeah, the experience in the cosmetic group really allowed me to understand that of me, and still today, and I'm board member of large organizations, and I see how important this is for me particularly.
Yeah, but when you decided that it's time for you to move on, how did you start looking for partners to start something of your own? And how did you come on to the idea of starting Seed Stars? What you said that you were interested in making a community and creating an impact out of it. But how did this community of seed stars, start?
I was so I don't know if I'm as an entrepreneur founder material, maybe now with all the years of experience, but at that time I was more willing to follow. And so when I met my partners, which and there, it was quite an insane idea for me coming from the corporate world, which was okay, next year we're going to travel 20 locations, never been, figure out what the ecosystem needs, how can we support entrepreneurs, who are the entrepreneurs, are there any entrepreneurs? I mean, it was really, we had no clue. um, and and I was like, that sounds at the opposite of everything I've heard until now. And a kind of a leap of faith, which maybe in reality, in a hindsight, is what you call listening to your intuition, the gut feeling, whatever you could name it. But there's this kind of intuitive sense that, okay, jump, worst case, what happens? I mean, you have to remember, I was 24, I had no children, I had very supportive parents, I wasn't going against society beliefs, like many of the entrepreneurs I meet that hustle to unbelievable extremes to do the job that they do. So I was very much lucky and fortunate in that sense to be quite lighthearted jumping into this adventure.
Yeah.
And then the idea slowly built up. Wow, so emerging markets, there's so much to do. How can we go more? Let's try to invest. Let's try to build programs. Now we're building coding and entrepreneurship schools. So then it came quite natural.
Yeah, but at a young age of 24, how did this idea of investing came in? Because at that time you're earning money. That's the age. Usually
Yeah.
people start their fund or maybe even their business for that matter, at least after some experience. So how did you get that capital initially?
So that came also from the experience of my co-founders, who they had already launched several businesses. They were a bit older than me. They were 30. So I think that came from their experience and also kind of bullishness to fake it until you become it. So there
Yeah.
was, which was completely the opposite of how I had been brought up in the corporate world. I remember I kept putting them in CC of every decision or email exchange I was doing with a third party, and they're like, CC me or not, it's still you're still accountable for it. If you mess up, it's on you.
Yeah.
And it was just so different, the approach. So I think that bullishness of just stepping up, going out there, overselling, overpromising, because we needed kind of a run rate, worked very well thanks to them.
But would you call this as hustle? Because you said that you entered into it with a light heart, but I see all of this as a hustle only. I mean, it's very difficult to do that.
No, it's true. It's just there's always a comparable of where you see other entrepreneurs. I mean, the level of extreme challenges they go through is makes my story much easier to digest, especially because it has a good ending so far. We see so many entrepreneurs struggle to find the right co-founders, and so I still feel that I'm extremely fortunate to be continuing to pursue the initial mission we had with the same people that I have huge respect for and that are ultimately my closest mentors. Huh?
Yeah. But speaking of co-founders, how were you able to convince somebody elder to you with experience to get on with you and pursue your idea?
It was more the other way around, because they had started already to come up with the conversation of building something for entrepreneurs, kind of an incubation model or traveling. So again, I consider myself much more of a follower in the initial idea. Had I been alone with this idea and had to start from scratch, I don't know if at 24 I would have done it without their drive and confidence to move this from paper to an actual business.
Yeah. Why don't you describe a little more on how did it come into reality? Because most of the founders face this issue of getting their idea into a product
Mm,
or this stage, they don't know how to get it off the paper and make it fly. So what
Yeah.
challenges you really yourself also face, and how did you overcome it to make it work?
Well, you're constantly selling yourself, the idea, then the business, then the scale of it. So it was getting used to that and figuring out what was the right pitch with the right stakeholder we had in front of us. But ultimately, when you do see that there's a gap in the market and a need to provide something more qualitative, more efficient, um, you start digging in. Um, our approach was we wanted to be global from day one. So Seedstars was launched out of the idea that we would already spread our wings out of 20 countries, first with local events, which would be kind of the tool to be able to launch the community at first hand. And from there, start building programs, making our first investments. And that would slowly become the track record to build more professional, sophisticated investment products, and at the same time education programs, so that we would really focus on the full funnel from wannabe entrepreneurs to investment ready businesses. And that's really been the philosophy for the past 10 years. Next year is our 10-year anniversary, and it comes down to just keep doing things step by step, learning hopefully as quickly as possible from the experiments and the ideas that we set forward. And yeah, and keeping in mind a very incremental approach, because it was there never was this kind of perfect hockey stick where overnight everything made sense and product market fit and we scaled it. No, it's constant challenges that we need to kind of figure out and fight to the whole system. And it's still difficult. It's still difficult to really succeed in building entrepreneurial education at scale in emerging markets with a sustainable economic model. It's still difficult to have capital inflow into these markets in very early stage, risky investment opportunities. So definitely a lifetime project.
Yeah, indeed, sounds like it. But like you mentioned that you had this idea of going global from the very initial stage, and most of the founders, vice versa, they have this idea of making it work in their own geographical area first and then expand. So, how did that global network work for you, and how did you maybe get out of your own country and launch it in other countries?
Mm, um, it was a bit opportunistic at first, because it was very with the idea of trying to just explore what the entrepreneurial community was out there. It was very difficult to choose one country. So it was kind of, you had this globe and we're just kind of putting a finger everywhere where we had at least one contact. And then you reflected on, okay, so how many countries can you do in a year and sustain kind of the idea of doing a startup competition? So
Hmm.
initially it was quite opportunistic. Um, it felt like it was a right approach to as a selling pitch, because people would open doors when we said we are the global startup competition, emerging markets from Rwanda to Mexico to the Philippines. It's true that everyone were opening their doors, so we would get great opportunities to speak with public and private stakeholders to support the competition, to invest with us. And finally, also there was this sense that we always wanted to diversify our assets. We knew that it was extremely risky to put kind of all your eggs in Nigeria versus another country where we hadn't built kind of a track record within the ecosystem. So purely kind of as a de-risking strategy, it made sense to spread from day one. And then later on, it also became a huge asset for us to have talents from everywhere.
Got it. But Moscow was one of your first places to start a competition, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah,
How did you choose that area to, launch a competition?
it was really like this.
Just choosing.
Yeah, we just wanted to expose ourselves to different continents. We felt like there was, I mean, Russia was already quite a sophisticated ecosystem. So the first years we kind of didn't really respect 100% the emerging market, like frontier market in terms of early stage startup ecosystems rule. But it was a really interesting and still is a very interesting ecosystem with a huge pool of talent. So it made sense for us to also visit Russia when thinking of Eastern Europe. And then it was very practical. We to get the cheapest flight, we bought the world tour tickets, and you had to start from one continent and move your way around the planet. It was as simple as that.
Speaking on that journey, I heard in one of your interviews that you had a no hotel rule and you would
Yeah.
just come at people's place, to understand how they function, how they think, and what the culture is like. So tell us a little bit on that front and some of your stories that you'd like to share.
It was probably the most memorable part of the journey, and it's a rule that we continued as long as the worldwide competitions were in operations. Before COVID, we were in 100 countries, and we had like couples, two talents per region, traveling in over 15, 20 locations. The idea was, we have no clue where we're heading. Like, we really didn't know the ecosystems. We had never traveled to these countries, so you probably will learn more about the rules, the social, the social habits and the social language by living with people that come from those countries, by better understanding where they come from, than finding yourself in a hotel and trying to be somewhat a bit respectful and understanding of the ecosystem and the entrepreneurs. Most of the times we were actually staying at entrepreneurs' house. So it was kind of an unbelievable gateway to an accelerated crash course into the startup ecosystem and what was working, what was not working, what were their struggles. And you jump into people's families, into people's traditions. It was really absolutely wonderful. And in every country we have had unbelievable experiences with the locals.
Wow. I mean, this is something that we all should learn from, that you shouldn't restrict yourselves in the four walls of hotel. Just go out and explore like a backpacker, because you never know what insights you derive from them. But
Yeah, it was really
yeah,
the rise of couch surfing at that time. And there were several startups that had launched themselves where they were kind of the niche couch surfer, but with a specific kind of entrepreneurial angle. So we really we really took advantage of all these ecosystems.
yeah. Now I know that why you were giving so much weightage to hustle, because you visit so many entrepreneurs' homes. You might have seen them working day in and day out, and you'd be like, oh my God, this is also the way people work.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, but what differences did you really observe in entrepreneurs in smaller nations like Uganda vis-a-vis in US or Italy maybe? Because the resources, the access to capital, everything is different in these nations. And since you've traveled extensively, lived with the founders themselves, what were the stark differences that you saw, and how did you try to, cover them up?
So in many regions where we traveled back in 2013, you have to imagine there was maybe one acceleration program, and many times that was run by kind of public entities or nonprofits. It was really at the beginning of the startup ecosystems, like in Uganda, for example. And what was humbling was to see that talent was really everywhere. That was kind of quickly confirmed wherever we went, but the access to the network, the infrastructure, the capital, the opportunities of exit, etc., was of course very limited or non-existent. And so it became very frustrating to see that the potential could be the same as the more mature startup ecosystems and the stories of those founders in the US or elsewhere. But it's just that they don't have that in their market. It was also a time where you really had the true democratization of technology. So you would see all these kind of frugal innovations and entrepreneurs that were kind of hacking the system to build much more sustainable and efficient models in whatever industry. And it was in industries where they were trying to optimize um, like SaaS prod. How can I say that? It wasn't kind of the latest Facebook for a local country, even though we saw many of those that had much higher numbers than Facebook, especially in Asia. But we were seeing a number of entrepreneurs really rethinking the healthcare industry, financial institutions, and lending opportunities, looking into clean energy options just to give energy for the first time to many communities. So the impact was huge if they were able to get the right infrastructure, talent pool, capital inflow. So that was what was extremely motivating, was to see the gaps, and at the same time kind of these rough gems, like really talents that just needed similar accesses as the other regions.
Yeah, in many ways, you are known to be a social entrepreneur yourself because you accelerate those companies a lot. So, how do you really measure impact? Because that's a long question that runs into everybody's mind, because ESG is something that everybody is focusing on, but how do you measure the impact, especially the G part, governance? In smaller startups where things go haywire at times if not paid attention to.
So we when we started, impact investing or impact governance was still not a thing. You would start seeing the frameworks in more philanthropic work, public government, you would see it. But in the private sector, there wasn't much, and we weren't aware of it. Our kind of impact thesis was we want to support these unbelievable entrepreneurs that are trying to build impactful solutions on the ground. And the pact was, we felt like there was kind of a shake of hands on a level of integrity that we had seen and principles that we believed they would keep as the company grew. It also would have been quite damaging, I think, if we had come in with too many criterias and if we had come in with too many requests in terms of reporting, governance, etc., because there's so much of it that it's just surviving. As we grew and as the portfolio and the companies we support and the entrepreneurs we try to train, we of course started to professionalize ourselves, sophisticate ourselves more in understanding what is an impact framework, how do you build the right indicators, how do you make it kind of dynamic in the system. And there's no one answer, unfortunately, because the impact is very theoretical still. How do you measure your intended impact on a business that will show its success under different indicators, which could be financial, related to their growth, their fundraising rounds, their profitability. It can be related to the number of employments that they have. It can be related to kind of the environmental positive impact that they can have. How do you frame that under indicators that can speak across different industries, across stages of businesses? How can you confirm that you are a direct positive correlation to their growth of their business, having done a support program for them 5 years prior? So it's very, very difficult still, and we're very much in the process of continuously experimenting on this kind of iterative machine that can gather more data and allow us to interpret. But sometimes you kind of have quick conclusions to the correlations, which actually have no cause and effect.
Yeah, that's true. But whenever you do find an indicative measure, please let us know. It'll be
Yeah. Yeah, our big thing now is, could there be a financial incentive to invest in impact companies, and seeing their seeing the interest on those businesses go up only if the impact goes up, without necessarily giving too much weight to its financial metrics.
Yeah, that's true. But having assessed a lot of impact-based startups, which ones were something that really impressed you in the first go, especially when the founder pitched what they're doing?
What is always most impressing is the personal story. It always starts with a personal, it's always very personal,
Yeah.
especially when you do early stage investment or support, because it really is the story of the founder and their the drive and the energy that you will feel through this story and believe will be the drive, will be the motivation needed for them to succeed in their business. And then it's astounding numbers, facts, um, absurdities that make you want to change it, from entrepreneurs trying to rethink healthcare system because the quantity of fake drugs that are being sold is still a direct consequence of many deaths in their region, to others that are trying to build maternal maternal how can I say, pregnancy related literacy, so that you can reduce the amount of death at birth when giving birth, to education programs or SaaS products for underprivileged in their communities. I mean, there's so many inequalities, so many opportunities that need to be fixed, and many of these entrepreneurs are doing just that. But you're always in awe by their personal stories, which always is very close to the mission they're trying to pursue.
Yeah, that's very true, because that is something which is unique to themselves, and not a copied version of someone else, you know. A
Yes.
lot of times, ideas might be something similar to what other people are doing, but your stories remain to yourself. But speaking of ideas, there's this notion that, okay, Silicon Valley only has a good amount of founders. And in one of your interviews, you also said that that's not the right notion. I mean, because you've traveled the world, you've seen many other entrepreneurs succeed as well. But why is there this notion that, okay, if it's a great startup, it has to be from Silicon Valley?
Well, so there is still kind of a global brain drain to Silicon Valley and now a couple of other hubs around the world, which for sure makes it that it's the quality, the velocity, and the impact of these businesses is quite impressive. And there's nothing to say. I think that maybe when I was looking at a nation level, governments trying to put in place these innovation ecosystem to drive the future economy, this kind of one size fits all model where they try to replicate Silicon Valley is hasn't worked, because simply they don't have the same history. It doesn't come from the same starting point. There are of course lessons learned and elements that can be transposed, but I think it's a very local and localized strategy to building an innovation ecosystem. So the reality is, yes, you can't beat Silicon Valley in terms of venture capital per entrepreneur, even though I believe it's highest in Tel Aviv, if I'm not mistaken, in terms of the talent pool, in terms of the kind of the full infrastructure from starting out to exiting. But at the same time, if you know that talent is everywhere, and that is kind of the default setting that you function with, then the opportunity to expose them with the right network, infrastructure, capital, and the other elements that build up a successful innovation ecosystem is, for me, extremely motivating, because they understand even better the needed solutions for their own communities. And it won't be, the solutions to all the challenges around the world will not be coming from Silicon Valley. That is for sure. So how do you empower them to be the ones to provide these solutions?
Got it. And you're one of them who's providing these solutions to founders, you know, to really scale up. But there are many accelerators or incubators, so to speak, in this world. So, how was it initially to get entrepreneurs your way? And was it like you had to convince them to be a part of your program? Because, in a way, both the investor and the founder both have to prove themselves at some point in time or the other. So, how was the dynamics for you?
So absolutely, we were convincing them, and it was more or less difficult to convince around the world, simply because there was no one interested in them in some countries, and in others there, it was much more competitive, if I may say so, in terms of opportunities of pitching events, incubators, government funding, grant money, etc. So it's for sure a different story in every country, and we've been more or less successful. But I remember every year when we would reunite the top entrepreneurs from around the world to Switzerland, which was the global summit. We would reunite over 100 entrepreneurs representing literally, I think, 90 countries. Every year, one, two, three, four of them would say, wow, for the first time, we're not on the side stage of a tech event. We are the main stage. And that was really, really the value proposition for us, is that you are the stars within this ecosystem, within the community. Investors are coming to see you. Talents are coming to listen to you. And that was, and yeah, so over a period of 10 years, literally every year, there are ecosystems where we're still telling these entrepreneurs, you're kind of a side product of what's going on around the world. And I think that was key to kind of our USP and positioning globally.
Got it. But how did you build a community of sorts where you have access to everything, investors, founders, the resources? How did you get that in place?
With the beauty of a functioning community, I think when the mission is very strong, the alignment in terms of what is the value proposition for each stakeholder, what are their incentives to stay part of the community and proactive in the community, makes it possible to scale quite quickly in a very efficient way. So we had kind of different categories. We had the Seedstars team, which were working within Seedstars, the Seedstars talents, which was a broader community of kind of consultant mentors. We had the Seedstars ambassadors, which were the representative of the ground, and there would be co-funding, revenue sharing opportunities. And there is, of course, then the Seedstars startup community and alumni that kept growing every year. So that was really, I think, our way to scale was having a community approach so that we could then operate all these different services, from opening up co-working space in Peru to launching now our second early stage fund in emerging markets.
Understood. But like you said, that you're launching a fund of your own, there's always this dilemma in everyone's mind. If they're good at something, there are two ways to choose: either start a business of their own or launch a fund. So how did you make that call? That, okay, I can be in the funding business.
Because we still believed it was kind of for us by us, for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So we felt that there is still a huge, we feel like it's part of our success that we tried building companies in these countries. We've tried supporting these entrepreneurs before investing in them. I moved to Nigeria for a year also to launch one of our first incubation centers, and you really understand what it means to do business development in another country only until you go live there. So I think this was very important for us to always use the experiences and the knowledge that we gather through our programs and have it bridged into the way we invest. And it was very incremental. Again, we started investing 6 years ago, but out of our balance sheet. And then we structured a small vehicle with friends, family, and high net worth that wanted to come in. And then we didn't necessarily want to be a VC fund, but that was also what the market wanted. So we started scaling, and now we have a much larger fund. But it came from always trying to listen to what the market needed, being entrepreneurs ourselves, understanding what were their needs also on the ground. And again, as always, kind of a diversification strategy, just continuing to be able to operate on different business models, because I can assure you, over the years, many times, from COVID-related issues to political instability in many countries, thankfully, we had different businesses running and not just one.
Yeah, that's true. But now that you're launching your fund, usually the fund structures work on 2 to 20, where 2% is management fee and 20% goes as carried interest. But these days, newer and newer funds are getting rid of the 2% management fee and, are only moving towards the carried interest part. So is that how your fund is also structured, or what kind of fund structuring are you noticing as an investor in your region?
We're a classical fund. Also because that's what our LPs, which are either big institutions like the World Bank or family offices. We also have some key strategic foundations. Um, um, for them, it was important to have kind of a very clear investment vehicle. But there are some, I don't know if we call them mirror funds, that kind of access another fund's deal flow, which allows them to reduce their management fee so that they can be more lean and attractive. There are some that are also looking to only allocate a certain percentage of their carried depending on impact metrics. We're exploring, but I'm not necessarily really confident that it's the most appropriate mechanism. Mostly these impact metrics are presented by a third-party advisory that sets them quite qualitatively and subjectively. So I don't know if that really moves the needle to attract more capital inflow or make managers work more towards impact. That's why we're looking a bit into blockchain, into community-driven decision-making that could maybe allow us to rethink how you measure impact, and more importantly, how you can build also financial return if impact goes up, if I may say so, and see if there's a model for that. So exploring also on the program side how better to support the entrepreneurs, because it's still very much a B2B model, but how can you link yourself more directly to the beneficiary?
Got it. But right now, as we speak, it's 220, which you've operated on in your first and your to be launched fund, is it?
Yes.
Got it. And you also spoke about your LPs. Speaking on that front, we see a lot of retail participation also, given that how private funds are growing and people are wanting to invest into it, since it's an attractive instrument which is giving apparently higher returns than any other investment would. So did you also have those kind of LPs in your fund? If yes, what's the minimum ticket size for them to invest?
No, so unfortunately, there's still larger funds where the minimum ticket is more. So we have several funds now, but 500,000 to 1 million. There is conversations of how can we open it up. Personally, one of the reflections I'm having with a group at Seedstars is how can we get more women LPs, because that would allow us to build kind of a virtuous cycle of then targeting more to women-led enterprises. We have done quite good. I mean, our funds is 50-50 in terms of gender equity from the GP to the analyst. I think there are more women than men, actually. We have a 30% target in terms of our portfolio, which is higher than the 2x challenge kind of guideline. So I think we're going well there, but there needs to be also work down in LP. So can we reduce the entry ticket so that we can get intelligent women that are part of a larger community, not necessarily professional investors, but that we could get them into that because it could be part of their second, third professional life. I think it could be a big game changer into feeding a more diverse ecosystem.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense, and not many people are doing this. I mean, you can create stars now out of investors also after having done it for entrepreneurs. But
Exactly.
yeah. But speaking on the gender diversity, you mentioned that in your competitions or programs, women would only be 10 to 20%, but you had to really separately launch a program for women to get more participation. So why do you think did this happen? Is it because women always have this idea that, oh, I will be perceived as someone who's stupid if I ask a question in front of men as well? Or do they have this notion that how can I even be in a room where there are more male entrepreneurs who are much smarter than me? So is that the notion why we saw lesser representation? And if so, how is the new ecosystem that you've created only for women helping out?
So we're not better than the industry benches. It's a bit higher and lower depending on the countries. I think it's not a question of them not wanting to pitch. It's more that was the actual reality of the tech entrepreneurial ecosystem and the women founders present. There
Yeah.
would be a larger community to be targeted that don't speak the startup jargon or the startup pitching kind of dynamic. But they've been quickly brought up to speed as they figure out the best fundraising models. Still, however, at Seedstars, we always reflect on, is our channel too skewed? Are we biased towards one typology of entrepreneur? Can we spread larger? Could that other typology of entrepreneurs allow us to have the correct return on investment and impact? And how do we speak to them? So definitely there have been conversations on how do you funnel your deal flow. But overall, I think it was a good representation of where the ecosystem stood. In terms of specific programs, sometimes they were pushed by our funders on the education side. So it would be programs we would launch with the European Union or other public-private entities. And it made sense to try and isolate women to understand from throughout the whole value chain, where were the biases, where were the where is kind of that gap where we saw that they weren't able to sustain themselves or their businesses. And we've learned a lot, and we're trying to continuously improve from, as I was mentioning, bringing in more women LPs. It's always part of this larger understanding that the more you see yourself throughout the different stakeholders that make decisions about the future of your enterprise and the future of you as an entrepreneur, the more you're capable to be driven by that success. So having more women mentors, having more women talents below, above in the board as investors. So rethinking all those elements, suggesting to do different formats than just startup pitching, which is very aggressive and doesn't speak to everyone. But at the same time, VC investment is quite aggressive. So there's also educating them on understanding how to pitch depending on which investor you have in front of you, because you also need to adapt to whom you have in front of you. So in summary, a lot of experiments to continue and build the most inclusive and belonging value chain so that we can succeed in diversifying our portfolio as best as possible. And that's really in terms of just performance. And you would want to look into that.
Yeah, you mentioned about pitching. Is it like, have you noticed a stark difference in the way women pitch their businesses? Have you seen themselves only talking about what they're doing presently and sometimes miss out on the bigger picture, which always makes the investor rethink their decision and think that, okay, should I really place my bet on this person? Have you
Yeah.
noticed that?
I actually asked the two GPs in our fund, a woman, and so Charlie and Patricia, and they were telling me that they don't see a difference, because usually when the women gets on stage, and it's not really always on stage, but the moment that they're pitching, they've usually been educated to how to pitch, so they can speak the jargon and they can use the right terms. Then it's more seeing that there's a gap in that education, where a lot of these women entrepreneurs are actually more functioning as small and medium enterprises. So kind of more like livelihood businesses, family-owned businesses, where they don't have the same level of exposure to this high growth tech VC environment. So there's more an issue with access. And then where we saw kind of differences in the pitch was more with our talents internally, and that made us reflect also on in the investment portfolio and the talents within the investment portfolio, where when we were thinking of talents fit for a job, for a promotion, we saw the majority of the time our women talents pitching themselves more conservatively and being less aggressive in convincing us they were right for the job than our men talents. And that's where we really changed our approach in the decision process for such talents.
Yeah, I think that change in mindset also helps in, fostering a culture where you're supportive of both the genders and the way they function, and respect the fact that they both are different and you can't expect the same level of aggression from both these
Exactly.
people.
Exactly.
Yeah, but speaking of that, you also mentioned somewhere that men negotiate harder for their pay, and one thing that you have consciously taken as a decision in your firm is that you will always make sure that there's no pay gap between a man or a woman. So, how is it really that other organizations can also learn from this? Because most of the times, the promotion really happens on the way you describe your achievements and what you've done in the past year, and that's where most of the women don't get promoted.
So, there are many factors that puts this gap in place. How we try to approach it at Seedstars, this is where we really like technology because it does have the power to build more transparency and hence more fairness. So we try to be, because we're quite a small group in the end, we haven't scaled to hundreds and hundreds of employees, is to really try and be as transparent as possible in the career path, in the intentions, in priorities in life that can change over time. Being more conscious how you promote the talent and the right talent, looking at the gaps end of the year and rectifying, identifying the errors, sharing that. So it's quite a safe place and open space to discuss. Easy for me to say as founder. I know it's harder for some talents that have just arrived, and so we're still figuring that out. But I think that's how we're trying to approach it, is data allows us to be more transparent and hence fair, and at the same, so that we can be fair collectively. And then we try to approach it on a case by case because it's always different.
Got it. And just have a last 5 minute rapid fire round. I know we've ran out of time, but will you have 5 minutes for
Yeah.
this?
Yes.
Okay, great. Cool. So, what are some of the red flags that don't sit well with you when it comes to businesses that you invest in? Because sometimes clashes might happen between a founder and an investor, and things can also settle down. But sometimes there might be some things that the investor really wouldn't like and would reconsider their decision. So, what are some of those red flags for you?
If we have more than a pitching event and we get to in due diligence phase and spend a bit more time with the entrepreneur, team dynamic is a real red flag. So when you see it working or not working, overselling themselves when they're too far from the pitch that they have in terms of contracts sold, in terms of their financials, in terms of the yeah elements that could really jeopardize the sustainability or the projections related to the business and that aren't sound or well founded. Of course, the integrity of a person, but that's, I guess, by default for everyone. Red flags where we messed up thinking we would be able to bring a lot of value and you realize you can't.
Yeah.
So that's always less interesting for us, and by default also for them. So yeah, those could be some of the red flags.
Got it. And why do some founders who really have great idea, great team in place, great resources, good investors, good capital, still they don't manage to fly? They just fail. Although their customers also love the product, but somewhere something just goes wrong, and we've seen many cases like that in the world. So, what is it really that makes them
Uh,
succeed?
there's no secret sauce. If not, it would have been everyone would be avoiding it like the plague. But um, so many factors that lead to the growth or to the demise of a business, and it would be very difficult to pinpoint one. Many times, what's always shocking to me is to realize it was before anything an issue of communication, because it seems so easy to resolve when you intellectualize it, but it's kind of a a huge deficiency of the whole system where no one is communicating anymore, and it quickly goes out of control.
Got it. Have you seen any such cases in the past? And if so, have you tried to, tell the founder, okay, this is where you're lacking, and they've really taken your, you know, suggestion seriously and have come back on the right path?
It's very easy to discuss and convince an entrepreneur on experience and technical expertise, and usually it's kind of quite immediate, the change. It's much more difficult to coach a founder on their soft skills, on their leadership capabilities, and see an immediate shift and change. And personally, but I think it's very different to each investment partner and how they manage their board. But personally, that's been always the most difficult, and where it's also been the most frustrating to not see that evolution, because it's fundamentally not your business. So it's very important to understand how best to coach, and how can you most efficiently identify the gaps in terms of soft skills.
Got it. So this is what comes post-investment, pre-investment. What are some of the things that you look at in a founder pitch, which makes you convinced that, okay, this is a good opportunity to explore?
Being very pragmatic related to our early stage fund, I think we have started to build a very strong expertise, but also network in kind of the industries of, future of commerce, future of finance. So I think there starts to be kind of an industry focus, a maturity focus, like a sweet spot in terms of where the company stands in product market fit, in revenue growth, in terms of their current talent pool and needs, and how we can support. So it's quite clear what type of entrepreneur we try to target. And then there's the alchemy of, can this relationship be successful?
Got it. And lastly, what's your business model like at Seedstars? What sectors do you invest in, and what check sizes do you offer?
For the fund side, we do on average tickets with the second fund of 250,000, with a bucket for follow-on investment on top. Industry, so right now is very much on future of finance and future of commerce, more or less geographic agnostic, but really with the outside of Western Europe and the States. And then we have other funds where we have kind of a joint venture relationship, where there's, for example, the Seedstars Africa Fund, which is a much later stage fund, tickets of 500,000 to 1 million for the African region. And it's quite a large scope in terms of industry and country focus in the region. And hopefully we'll be representing and launching more funds as we grow.
Yes, absolutely. There's clearly a great path for you, plus entrepreneurs themselves, because they need something like your institution to get them, started onto their journeys. Thanks a lot for your time, Alisée. Great speaking with you.
Thank you.